Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher, and we are looking at the Destruction Warlock. Yes, that big beast dropping those huge numbers and smashing you right in the face in the BGs. Hasn't undergone a lot of changes as with several classes. Patch 5.2 was a confuser for me. It had a ton of class changes in it. It was the major class change patch. However, a lot of those things were balancing issues and the gameplay style didn't change too much. Now, I'm going to say, I spoke to a few people about the Destruction Warlock after playing it for a while, getting my gut feel and my fingers all reminded about how to play this bad boy, and they did describe it to me as the retard spec of the game. Okay. What do they mean by that? They said it was the new Arcane, or they felt it was the new Arcane, and the fact that the style is extremely basic. Kind of difficult to argue with that. It is kind of difficult to argue that Destruction is a little bit simple. In fact, the biggest change that came from 5.1 to 5.2 was in fact including Rain of Fire in your rotation. So I am going to mention that Rain of Fire is a part of your rotation if it will last the full 8 seconds. Obviously, if it's got more mobs, if it's got more than one, it's more effective. But even with single target, keep Rain of Fire down as well. That's going to be removed in patch 5.3. It was the only reason I was debating it. So if you are watching this in patch 5.3, it's no doubt been removed. I could be wrong, but they do want to remove it. It's not something they plan to happen. But right now, it is a DPS increase as it generates more embers. For you guys looking for a simple style of playing your gemming and reforging, first off, check the guide I did in 5.0. It's up in the background right now. And also, just bear in mind, the simple way of doing this is keep Immolate on, use your conflags, get your backdrafts, use them on Incinerates. Don't waste Chaos Bolts with 3 stacks of backdraft. Chaos Bolts is not worthwhile if you have 3 stacks, unless you're going for some super quick nuke under the effects of special things. But if you're looking for a simple style of play, use your backdrafts on Incinerate. Chaos Bolt takes 3, so if you have 2 stacks of backdraft, your Chaos Bolt will not consume them. Other than that, you're good to go. You're incinerating, you're immolating, you're conflagging, and that's about it, and Chaos Bolting in the meantime. Now, when it comes to everything else, if we get into the more advanced style of this, similarly to the Demonology Warlock, which we've also recently covered, if you haven't seen the Demonology Warlock, I recommend you check it. I actually found that spec to be a lot more fun than this. A lot more fun, despite its huge numbers. Despite the fact that it crushes faces and you see them big 1mm crits and all that kind of good juicy stuff, it is a little bit boring once you get past that. It's kind of like Diablo 3, I guess. On the face of it, Diablo 3 looks awesome. You smash things to pieces, you're gearing up, you're doing all that good shit. And then about a couple of days down the line, or if you're in my case, about 5 hours into the game, you suddenly realise this isn't actually that much fun at all. I'm doing the same things over and over again, and it doesn't matter how big my numbers are, it's just a little bit boring to play. I kind of agree with that. My biggest criticism of this spec, which I'll get into kind of later, was the fact that it did get boring real quick once you get over the numbers, especially if you're someone like me who only shows numbers for really the entertainment value. I don't care particularly what my numbers are, they go up and down. Then it's not that enjoyable a spec to play. For those of you looking for some advanced tips, it's pretty basic. It is pretty basic. You just want to be banking your Chaos Bolt, similar to the Demon Warlocks, who are banking their Demonic Fury for when they have Trinket procs and so on and so forth. You do have the option. You do have the viability and the option as you get more and more comfortable with this spec is that you are banking Chaos Bolts for when your trinkets go off and people are dropping things like Skull Banner. You're under these kind of big DPS effects that are going to push you to the limit. It's well worth bearing that in mind as you do not have to rush with your Chaos Bolts. It's a lovely resource system. I have no issue at all with the resources system of the Burning Embers. I really like the fact that we have the choice to drop our main nuke as and when it needs. Also, Destruction providing huge utility. Nothing wrong with this spec. We've seen this spec played at Raden on the World First. They were rolling Destruction Warlocks. It's really powerful. It has huge on-demand burst. This needs to die. It doesn't have a lot of health. Well, I'm going to stick a Chaos Bolt up its ass and then watch it drift away merrily. Good stuff. Little bit of criticism to go along with this bad boy. I think it's worthwhile to discuss. I don't intend to do a Warlock specific discussion right now. Perhaps that video will come later down the line. When I respect Destruction in order to get ready for the guides and retrain myself on it and practice it, running a lot of dungeons, running a lot of LFRs, talking to people, discussing things about it that I picked up and noted, I did quickly notice that the fun had wore off. It is a very basic spec, and I don't want to drill that in too hard for people who love this spec. People enjoy the simplicity of a spec. In fact, I do. In general, I quite like specs where I don't have to pay too much attention to what I am doing with my class in order to maximize it. I like to take in the environment, I like to practice what I'm doing and playing better. But this one did start to feel a little bit sterile. And more to the point, it actually felt frustrating, especially concerning AoE. Single target is pretty straightforward, but when we get to AoE, it actually was a little bit dull. It felt tacked on. It felt like it wasn't really designed with fun in mind, which is kind of unusual for a game. And what I mean by that is the fire and brimstone mechanic. The fire and brimstone mechanic I actually find to be disgustingly boring, to the point where I felt like this was a half-assed attempt to do something interesting. The fire and brimstone mechanic for your AoE is what converts your normal spells to simply be AoE spells. That's it. So your Immolate becomes AoE Immolate. Your Conflag is AoE Conflag, and your Incinerate now hits all targets. That sounds cool that I can fire off a ton of Incinerates. In fact, while I was doing AoE, I had the simplest time of actually pulling off impressive numbers compared to, say, an Affliction Warlock who has to work a little bit harder and micromanage, but we'll get into that in the Affliction video. This whole thing just got frustratingly boring to the point where I almost debated doing extra keybinds that would use Fire and Brimstone, and I could just do an extra Immolate and an extra Conflag and an extra Incinerate button. There's nothing fun about having to press a button before you cast another spell every single fucking time you're AoEing, especially in prolonged AoE. It was a case of Fire and Brimstone Immolate, Fire and Brimstone Conflag, Fire and Brimstone Incinerate, Fire and Brimstone Incinerate, Fire and Brimstone, and this simple process of repetition in pressing the keys actually started to get on my nerves, as it's just a terrible idea. What I would prefer is something that consumes maybe several Burning Embers in order to give us a buff that converts our spells for a short period of time, or something else to AoE with. As cool as it is to have AoE Immolate and AoE Conflag and AoE Incinerate, it actually became rather dull pretty quickly, and I ended up just being frustrated that I was having to press this button all the time. Of course, while you're doing AoE, you generate ridiculous amounts of Burning Embers, which you can fire off with Shadow Burns as the mobs start to die. But other than that, you're essentially just pressing the same button and continuing a single target rotation. It made AoE just a single target process where I was just looking and doing the same thing over and over again. So AoE had no flavor, it had no fun. As much as I like that all the Warlocks have this on-use modify your spells ability, the Fire and Brimstone ability is nowhere near Soulburn. For example, a great example there is Soulburn, which actually switches the spells to do something else for a prolonged period of time, changing your Soul Swap and your Seed of Corruption to actually have new and different effects, something with a little bit of flavor, a little bit of purpose. Fire and Brimstone doesn't do that. It just says, oh, you're AoEing now. Fire and Brimstone Immolate. Now you've immolated everything. Oh, you're AoEing still. Fire and Brimstone Conflag. Now you've conflagged everything. And it was just incredibly simplistic, and not a lot of creativity went into that. And it did get frustrating for me. As much as the numbers are there, again, I don't care about what my numbers are. As long as I'm doing AoE, I'm fine. But yeah, that was my only criticism. But it is minor. I don't want to dwell on it. It's more of an inconvenience. I felt like it was just tacked on there and it lacked a little bit of creativity, and by the time I was AoEing a lot, which you obviously do in dungeons and trash packs and so on, I was just done with it. I was just bored with it. It just felt like I was doing nothing different at all, which didn't add to the flavour of the class. As I said, single target is not overly interesting for the Destruction Warlock. Well, in fact, AoE isn't either, because AoE is essentially single target on multiple mobs without having to change target, which then lost the flavour again. So that might have been what added to the basic and boredom factor. But for a new player, Destruction Warlock is a great way to start. You're going to get your big numbers, which new players obviously love to see, and even old players love to see those giant big ass crits landing all over them. The use of Havoc, of course, bringing in the fact that you can double crit people in the face, something I was overjoyed with when I played the Mr. Pandaria beta. I was absolutely ecstatic when I got to play with Havoc. But that effect again quickly wears off once you realise it's just something you'll tab targeting to, and then you get to fire off too. Lacks a little bit of flavour, not quite on par with Demonology and not quite on par with Affliction in terms of fun, but it produces the numbers and it works. So if you're looking for something relatively simple to play and give you good results, Destruction Warlock's a great place to start. It'll get you into the basics of the game, and it'll also start teaching you to watch out for when your trinkets proc, when your other things happen, so you can start making some decisions and move you to some advanced styles of play, which you can maybe apply to other specs, even within the Warlock. Alright guys, that's your Destruction Warlock. You take it easy and have a good time.